Cruise of the Conrad. The little ship. To leeward, the Dover cliffs, pale in the autumnal sun, showed me the last of England, and overhead the longshore gulls wheeled and cried for the last time. In the rigging the soft nor'easter quietly murmured into the sails with scarce weight enough to hold them from the masts. Aft the soft stream of the wake was almost imperceptible as the ship, upright and graceful, moved gently through the water. The pilot had left now, and the ship was mine, and I looked along the decks and at the masts in mild alarm. What was this I was about to do? What had led me here, almost in spite of myself, setting out in a full-rigged ship, in the year of grace 1934, to make a circumnavigation of the globe, taking this tiny sailing ship out to sea where she had never been, leading this heterogeneous collection of mariners and schoolboys, sailors and landsmen of 8 nationalities, who, taking their last look at England, filled my decks. I in command and leading them, who never had commanded anything anywhere or led anyone to anything. I, now master, who had been able seaman and not else, save understudy to Duclos, to sail this last of all the English ships, to write Finis to a centuries-long line of great traditions, to propel with her sails this last frigate round the world. I found myself filled with a great humility, and almost reeled a little at first, with a knowledge of my own shortcomings. And yet I was there. No one else had come forward. I had set out. I had to go on. I had a ship and 30 lives in my hands, and I would trust them in no others now. Quickly the work of the voyage and the sailing of the ship so filled my mind that I had no further time for alarms and bewilderment. We sailed on, gales blew, we beat doggedly, we shortened down, clinging to a little canvas with grim determination against the autumn gales. The sea rose, the visibility worsened, the gales increased. It was late October 1934, and the ship Joseph Conrad, 212 tons, was bound down channel across the North Atlantic and round the world, and there stood I to take her. I thought of numerous persons better qualified, but there had been so much talk and no one had done anything. After all, I had found this lovely ship and saved her from the break-up yards, and I had at least been reared in sail, and stuck to it. I was aware of the ocean's endless enmity, aware of the month-long voyage, long need for ceaseless vigilance, and of a good ship's need for the care of all her detail. I had a fair idea of what I was about to try and how it might be accomplished, and I had sailed for years under Reuben Duclos, stout Finlander, greatest of the surviving windship masters in the world. I had been in the Cape Horn grain ships, 6 voyages, had served in the Tasman Sea barks. In whaling vessels it was a good school. I had at least come early to a realization of all that could be learned. All I didn't know would never know. I had been so long accustomed to the ordinary working of a sailing ship with square sails that now the management of a ship under sail came naturally to me, though I never before had managed one, and if I had little experience as a navigator, why, I was about to have a lot I could learn. So I kept my misgivings to myself and showed to others only my determination to go on, and held to the reefed topsails, and beat down that gale-filled sea road that leads from England, and fought against 3 gales in 4 days. And when a deputation of my passengers came to me asking that I should run for shelter from the storm, I smiled at them and refused. We had the channel beaten then. What, give in, go back? No, no, go on. My little ship had shown herself strong and sweet and wholesome in the sea, stout-rigged and buoyant and faithful. Steadfastly she fought against the sea's onrush and the weight of wind, and I only hoped before my God that I would never let her down. We went on. My ship was the last surviving frigate in the world, a single topsail, full-rigged ship crossing 3 royals. She was 100 feet on the waterline, 25 feet beam, drew 12 feet, grossed 212 tons. She had been, when I found her, for 52 years a school ship for the Danes. She was built by Burmeister and Wayne in Copenhagen in 1882, of Swedish iron. Her name was then George Stage, after the shipowner who financed her building, and she had been training 80 young Danes annually. Built for safety, she was exceptionally strong and able and seaworthy, as a good ship could be made. She was fitted with 5 transverse bulkheads of steel, dividing her into strong compartments, any 3 of which, undamaged, would keep her afloat. I was to test this later on. Her decks were of teak, her rigging strong iron wire, her mast of iron and pitch pine, her sails good hand-sewn hemp. She carried a big sail plan and could set 12,000 square feet of canvas. She had deep single topsails, triple reefed, top gallant sails, and royals on all 3 masts. She was equipped to carry studding sails, and her long jib boom set 3 big headsails. She had the line of a frigate of 100 years ago, the strength of a sperm whale in the ocean, and the grace of a swan. I found her quite by chance as I walked the waterfront of Copenhagen one June day. I had gone there looking for a ship, some kind of an oaken schooner, not too large, strong-built, copper-fastened, that could be changed a little without too great expense, and made to fit to wander tropical seas. I was rather vague about this ship. She had to be cheap, since I was not wealthy. She had to be small, able, handy, strong. Ships were selling cheaply in those days. Schooners without engines were no longer wanted anywhere. Shipping throughout the world was suffering severely from the Great Depression that had begun in 1929, and vessels of many kinds could be bought for a song. We had bought the big 4-master Parma from Germany in 1931 and did not have to sing very loudly. She had done well in the grain trade from Australia. I was temporarily in possession of some funds from the successful voyaging of the Parma and the quiet success of a book or 2, principally in America, not much, but enough to buy a ship in those days when ships were cheap. But I found that I had come to Copenhagen too late. The good engineless schooners were all gone. True, there were some still for sale, but they did not appeal to me. They were not what I wanted. I had already searched in many places, and had looked at ships in San Francisco Bay and Newport News and Boston, the China clay ports of Cornwall, Sydney, the South Seas. In San Francisco a year before there had been a pretty little schooner named Coquette, teak-built in China somewhere. I had almost bought her. In Boston I saw a tall 2-master that had sunk at her berth in the dock, but she was a frail and doll-like thing, long in the overhangs and high in the masts, too high and fitted luxuriously below. I had neither use nor funds for luxury, and I soon discovered that the ideas of the Americans when valuing their schooner yachts were too optimistic for me. Nor did I want a yacht as such. I wanted a vessel with a deck to walk on, and a hull unfilled with tiny cabins, lavishly furnished, and showers and refrigerators, and stainless steel. Not that I scorned the comforts of modernity, but it was the ship that mattered. The ship first, second, last, and all the time. It seemed to me these pampered, bright work dolls were good for Long Island Sound. At Par in Cornwall was a topsail schooner, pretty good. I thought of her a while, but did not purchase, though I might have done so. Somehow I sensed that the ship for me was not yet come. There was something almost providential at last in her discovery. Disconsolate from the failure of my long search, and wondering if, after all, the ship I wanted had any real existence, I chanced to walk the Copenhagen waterfront down by Langelinie, not with the hope of seeing anything, though powered schooners were often anchored there, but just because my feet had taken me there, as they so often had before, to all the waterfronts of the world. And there, to my surprise, I saw a full-rigged ship. She was no ordinary ship. No vessel of that rig is ordinary. She was of the real old frigate type, gloriously proportioned hull, with a seat in the water like a sea-bird, tall, symmetrical, mast and tapering yards, all painted a light golden color, and a long jib-boom projecting far beyond the sweet grace of her cutwater, and the bronze figurehead, and she had stunsail booms, and bowlines, and hammock nettings, and sails that clewed to the bunt, and all those long-forgotten things that belonged to great ships last century, and lanyard rigging, and stout channels, and many boats. And how her brasswork and her teak shone in the sun. She was small, about 200 tons, I thought, much the size of Bligh's Bounty, but what a picture of grace and sea beauty! I stopped and watched, and as I looked I saw a crowd of boys ascend her rigging, 2 to each royal, and each top-gallant, 4 to the topsails, and 6 to each course, while others manned the capstan on the small foresail head, and began to tramp up the anchor. Whistles blew, and as one sail, the white canvas fell, loosed from her yards, down on deck again, with a boy to each top to overhaul the gear. They backed the head yards, braced up the main and mizzen. Now the capstan pawls clanked merrily, and the cable came in over the windlass. Whistle again, up and down, set sail it was then. What a night, what a sight! The 3 topsails at once, then the topgallants and the royals, up with a swing right in the crowded anchorage. A few more turns around the capstan, and the anchor was broken out, while the little beauty gathered sternway and began to swing as her main and mizzen filled, the backed head yards putting her round in the restricted space on her heel. Let go and haul, round, round with the head yards, then, and it was a delight to watch her as she stood a moment in her stride still swinging, halted with the sternway off, and just gaining headway as the sails all filled, then moving off with stately grace upon her course through the moving and anchored shipping of the harbor. There goes a sailor with a ship, by God, I thought, and read upon stern George stage. I did not know what ship it was, and looked up from my reverie to hear a man saying it was a pity she was to be broken up. What, broken up? That ship? It could not be, but I heard the man say she was too old, and the new ship to replace her would soon be ready, and nobody wanted the old. I leapt it into a taxi, then and there, and rushed off to the office of my broker, who had painstakingly been offering me vessels of all kinds, dry docks, tugs, trawlers, steamers, for the past 2 weeks, and burst in upon him and shouted, "Is that ship for sale?" "What ship?" he asked, with some astonishment. "Why, the full-rigged ship," I said. "The old school ship." "Of course," he said. "They've been trying to get rid of her for some time." They tried no more. I bought the lovely little ship that afternoon, after the most cursory examination, for was she not a school ship, built and kept up by the Danes? No weakness and no faults would be tolerated there, and did not know until afterwards that she had an engine. Indeed, I found this discovery disappointing at first, but it was a very weak and old engine, and had hardly ever been used. The master of the vessel for the Danes had not used it. It had to be there, he explained apologetically, for the safety of the boys. If ever for an accident it should be necessary to reach port quickly in a calm. But he had not used it, except once with an epidemic of scarlet fever had forced him to make hurriedly for land. The ship had no need of it, he said, but it was good ballast, and the small screw was feathering and did not affect the sailing qualities, and it was all secured and battened down so that there was no smell. I was disappointed for all that. I need not have been alarmed. In the first year of my voyage that engine worked, I think, 2 days. In the second year the fuel tanks were empty, it was in pieces and worked not at all. The ship was in commission when I inspected her, and I was to take her over when the summer's cruise was done, in the early fall. I had 2 months then in which to decide what I was to do with her, what and how. I had first to pay for her, and this I could do. I could pay for her and bring her to England. I thought I would like to make her a school ship for boys, not necessarily only for boys who intended to follow the sea professionally, for these are now well trained in steam, but for the right kind of young fellow from anywhere. For years there had been much talk in England of the need for such a ship. Well, here she was, if she was wanted. I quickly discovered that she was not. There were cheers, but few applications. It looked for a while as if I should get no boys at all. My mail included letters from retired naval chaplains, retired admirals, and kind-hearted and public-spirited old ladies and gentlemen who applauded my move. But in a month there was not a single application for any boy. There were 37 applications from old sailors, mostly long left the sea, who wished to come either as master or as officers, and there were many letters from young girls from so far afield as Austria and Australia. But boys, in 6 weeks I had one, and I had been prepared to do so much. I would have handed the ship over to a properly constituted committee had there been one. I would have made no stipulations about myself, for I knew very well that my poor qualifications would wilt before any real survey. But there was no committee, and there was neither demand nor place for a real sailing school ship for England. I fortunately had been prepared for this. I could still follow my own ideas. I could man the ship with a nucleus of grain ship sailors, some of whom were English, and I would get some boys. But what should I do with such a vessel? How could I support her running, pay the bills? This was a problem. I thought and decided in the end that since I had a ship, I might as well embark upon the unimaginative enterprise of a circumnavigation. True, this is overdone in our day, when upon any morning of the week at least 12 small yachts are somewhere battling round the world, and any one may make a circumnavigation who pushes the fare across an office table, when cruising liners set out in long procession upon much advertised excursions to the ends of the earth and back again, all in 4 months, with surprising cheapness, when airlines span all continents and most of the seas, but there are still room in the ocean for a full rigged ship, and if I began to make a long passage anywhere, I might as well continue round the world. I knew well enough, too, that I might be able only to make one voyage. If that, then let it be a grand gesture, a long wandering. I thought that, having now almost the same kind of ship in which all the great navigators had sailed, Cook, Wallis, Bougainville, Carteret, Bligh, Lemaire, and all those other blazers of the Pacific Trail, I might try to make such a voyage as they had made, not as a planned stunt, not as a programmed advertised excursion, but quietly as they had gone, quietly against the sea, without benefit of canals or of engines. It was a biggish thing to try, but the more I thought of it, the more I liked it. I was steadfastly opposed to all the shams and stupidities with which many voyages in these days have been unduly concerned. I would make no films, advertise nothing, perform no stunts, engage in no radio programs. I was no scientist, and I would not pretend to be one. There was nothing to discover, no lands or islands, and I knew it. I had been round the world 9 times already, and there was no novelty in that. But I could keep a form of art alive upon an earth which had grown in thought beyond the need of it, and I could sail for the sailing's sake, for the sake of the health and the life and the clean wind and all the joy of being there. I could find some boys to share it all, and train them and make men of them, and together we could look upon what man had made of the far islands his wandering forefathers in just such ships had found for him. I had some ideals and some beliefs. I had already grown to love that ship so beautiful. In all her half-century of life, she had not been beyond the Baltic and North Sea. She deserved a voyage. Freed from her schooling work, at last she could go off to far places and disport herself in the great ocean she was made for, and one day we went. I took the ship over from the Danes in the Navy Yard at Copenhagen towards the end of August 1934, and Captain Junker, master of the vessel 20 years, brought his 2 small sons to haul down the Danish flag for the first time. He walked down the gangway to the dock, unhurried and stalwart between his boys, and with some tears, and did not come near to or look upon the ship again. He was to have the new ship, but he had grown up in the old. Now the red duster was hoisted, and the new name painted at bow and stern, Joseph Conrad. I had to change the name, for that was a stipulation of the sale. The new ship would also be George Stage. I chose the Polish author's name as fitting. For the ship and for her voyage, and is giving to myself and all her people something to live up to, for Conrad was a noble and high-minded man with great ideals and determination, who had overcome almost impossible difficulties and risen to great heights. The ship was fit to bear his name, and for such a ship there could be no better. Manning had been an almost insuperable difficulty, though. I had long been marking down in my mind's eye mariners for just such an enterprise, Horst and Carl, and the second mate and the steward from the Parma, Hilgerad, who had served a voyage there and was now back at school. My brother Frank, who was years in the Hugmont, and now was off in an oil tanker somewhere. Good Jim from the Olive Bank, and Grace Harwar, and the Frenchman Pierre Berthaud from the Garthbull, and tall Tom Germain from the bark Rothsay Bay, where we had been cadets together years before, if I could find him, and those other able young fellows from Captain Suffern's old merchant service school on Albert Park Lane in Melbourne. But where had they gone? Married, left the sea, or fighting upward slowly towards the top in great liner companies. I could not find them. If I found them, they could not go. I could not find anywhere a suitable young British officer trained in sail who would go. I did not want an officer older than myself. In a small ship on a long voyage, that is apt to breed difficulty. I was then just 30. Most of the British sailing ship officers had seen their last service at least 10 years before. Few of them, indeed, could have been much under 50. Several who wrote said they would not again face Cape Horn. Most of them wanted to be master, but it was to be just that, to make the voyage and to sail the ship myself, that I most wanted. So, in the end, I found myself compelled to take a young mate from the bark Penang, one of the Erskine grain ships, who was 26 and had been in deep water sail 9 years. He stepped from the decks of a square-rigged ship onto mine. He had little to learn in the way of a ship. Few readjustments to make. He spoke perfect English and had been in an Australian schooner. My second mate was a Swede, aged 24, from the Swedish naval schoolships Af Chapman and Najdin. I got the steward from the Parma, but could not get the second mate. I brought Horst and Carl from Germany. I took over 2 Danes with the ship. They knew her, and there was much about her strange to me. I tried to track down every British boy I knew who had been apprentice in the Ericsson fleet, but all save one had been only one voyage and would not repeat the experience. I cabled Hilgard in America, not thinking that his parents would let him come, had my brother pay off his tanker in Brisbane and hurry home. Found the carpenter from the bark Alastor serving temporarily in a steamer, and rescued him from there. Found the cook of the old oil schooner Navajo in the Ipswich docks, and signed him on, but it was difficult. My crew mounted slowly, and I was anxious to be gone. I had first, of course, to get the ship to England, to Ipswich, Suffolk's county town, which was to be her new port of registration. To do this, I took an old friend of mine who had been a shipmate in the 4-masted bark Bellons, and was now an extra master, Godfrey Wicksteed. He assumed command and sailed the ship to England. I was not fool enough to take chances in the North Sea. The remainder of the crew was composed of divers gentlemen who had written asking for the chance to sail a little in the vessel, a clergyman, a physician, a lawyer, some boys, some yachtsmen, and when they had it, did not seem to appreciate it very much. We had not gone far before a gang of them borrowed the motorboat and cruised around to trawlers asking to be put ashore. I let them go. The trawlers would not take them. It was as well we had no bad weather in the North Sea, but my curious crew was not without its good points. There were some famous humorists, of whom the chief was the young son of a British general, an estimable and exceedingly good-natured lad, whose only disadvantage was an infinite capacity for doing the wrong thing, but he did the wrong things so cheerfully and was always so irrepressibly merry and bright that I was sorry when he left at Ipswich. He was a good lad, he would have made a fine cadet, but he was entered for a university. The parson was the best sailor, he had real feeling for the sea and him. The lawyer complained bitterly and without end of the tasks assigned him, saying they were menial. A gentleman, according to him, did not work with his hands, but his conception of the proper maritime pursuits for a gentleman was recent, vague, and narrow. He had, he said, intended to sail with the ship on her transatlantic crossing, but he left at Harwich, and I was not depressed. But I must say that those among these pseudo-mariners of mine who really were yachtsmen, who really had sailed in small craft, did quite well. But I began to have grave doubts about the kind of maritime material I should get in England. Of skilled young sailors there were none. How could there be when there were no ships? A boy or two began to come forward, and in a month at Ipswich I shipped as many as I wanted in the main 'tween decks, likely young fellows, most of whom seemed the right material. It was a long month in Ipswich. Many problems arose, some of which I had not foreseen. I had some troubles. I had to make some alterations in the ship, to fit her for deep-water voyaging, not much. I added a chart house, built skids, and took the boats inboard, put cabins in the after 'tween decks for my friends and suitable people who wanted to come, for I was compelled to take the right kind of person, as he showed up, to help to pay the expenses of the voyage, and increased the water supply. I had some difficulties over registration. I made no secret of what I intended to do, to carry cadets who would be required to pay if they could afford it, and to carry a few other older men so far as they might want to go, to share in the expenses. Was my vessel legally a yacht or not a yacht? She was not a trading vessel. I should never carry cargo. She was not designed for that. Neither was she an official school ship, having nobody's approval but my own. Then she had to be a yacht. In truth, she was no yacht, never was, if by that term one understands a vessel bought as a plaything for the wealthy, and I was no yachtsman. I never had been. I have never sailed a yacht. I know nothing of fore and aft rig, have always followed the sea professionally, but if an amateur is one who does things for love and for love alone, then I was absolutely an amateur. All the earnings I'd got from the sea or from anywhere were in this ship. There was and could be no commercial aim about her voyaging. I had bought her with my own savings, and did not advertise the fact that they were then almost exhausted, and was determined to set out on this voyage, and by the grace of God to accomplish it, but profit by it. That never entered my head. That was impossible. I am fortunately one who regards any money that comes my way as a necessity to be used. Whatever money I have spent, I have always looked upon as automatically lost. I cannot get into my head the idea of investment, of money making money. Never having had any, I had not learned of that. I had been most surprised when the Parma turned out so profitably. But it was a little difficult, understandably, to get these ideas into others' heads. At times I found myself looked upon as an adventurer, almost a dangerous one, concerning whom there was some suspicion that he was using the ship and the promise of the voyage to beguile cash from the unwary and the young. Well, people had done that. Altruistic motives have always to be demonstrated pretty thoroughly to be believed. The problem of my registration was not finally solved until I was about to leave. There were other difficulties, many of them. I was worried by financial problems, by human woes, by red tape, and by formalities, until I lived only for the day when I could leave England, get out with my ship, and stay away. I found indeed that I had a good sailing ship crew. But I was without lieutenants. Where should I find one? My friends could not come. The voyage, they said, would be too long. I was going too far. It would soon be winter. There would be a lot of winter, with Good Hope and the west winds and Cape Horn. I very much needed then and throughout the voyage some good second-in-command who was not a sailor, necessarily, some one to help in looking after the boys, some one for companionship at sea, and to share the responsibilities in ports, where usually things go wrong. I never found one. After all, there are not many persons who can tear up their roots and embark on such an enterprise freely and with open hearts, merely because one asks them to. The number who would like to go is legion, but my accompanying friends were none. I sailed alone, and I found, too, that I had to be careful in the selection of the boys and young men who offered to come, so that I did not get some neurasthenic or pale problem wished upon me. I turned some down, and began almost at once to hear nasty rumors. While the ship lay at Ipswich, there came almost nightly a procession of pale youths, the most of them obviously maladjusted in some manner common enough with the complexities of our living, to analyze at great length their desire for the sea, and then never to be seen near the vessel again. I became more or less accustomed to this. One has to be something of a judge of human beings. It is a queer and depressing business, mustering a collection of young gentlemen for the sea, when the regrettable matter of finance must enter into it. I wished to God then, and I wished even more fervently afterwards, that I could cheerfully go ahead and take 10 or 12 boys without any funds whatever. But I could not, for it was foolish to set out without reasonable prospect of continuing. Some strange young men made application to ship for the voyage. One or two came, none stayed. I should wrong my friends indeed if I did not give them full credit for wanting to come on the voyage, but it is an unfortunate fact somehow that the more one fits into the scheme of things on the land, the more one does is worth, contributes, the less chance is there of going off on a long sea voyage. It would be easy enough to assemble a shipload of drones, and it seemed to me that women might be had by the liner load, but in them I was not interested. There are some problems better left ashore. But at last I was almost ready, and I sailed down the Orwell with a heart that would have been much lighter had I not to anchor again at Harwich for a few days. The little boys, Goodchild and Fuller, Ipswichian dinghy sailors, stood on the foresail head, grinning from ear to ear, and helped me con the ship, for the weak tug could not hold us in the wind, and I'd had to sail without pilot, chart, or engine. These two little chaps were just the kind of boy I wanted, alert, keen, good-mannered, intelligent, interested in the sea. But how difficult such lads were to find. These found themselves. They came aboard, asking timidly for jobs, and I signed them then and there. At Harwich there came a surveyor, hotfoot, from the Board of Trade in London, to whom a letter had come alleging that my vessel was a hell ship. Good Lord, so he had come down in haste to look for blood in the scuppers, and found none, of course, and talked with the boys and all the crew, and left well pleased. He was a very pleasant surveyor, but he made a thorough examination, and looked to see that I had a good crew to sail the ship and train the boys. He saw the officers' certificates. Fortunately, he did not ask for mine. I had none. I was possessed of no official qualification whatever, but what of that? I had stayed in Finnish ships when the British sailors were all gone, and no British certificate would help me there. I had not foreseen that I ever might acquire a ship for Britain myself, nor could I get a Finnish certificate when I was not a Finn, but I was merely following in the best traditions of the sea and sailing ships, for most of the great trade routes of the world were opened up and sailed for centuries by men who held no kind of certificate. You held command then because you were able to. If I were not able, I should not get very far, but I was rather glad the subject never came up. When the surveyor was gone, I decided to leave England, regardless of the fact that my preparations were not as complete as I should have wished. What unnecessary problem would next beset me if I stayed even one more day? I did not know, and despite the fact that it was dull and wet and gloomy, and the forecast was for Channel gales, I hove up my anchor early on the morning of October 22nd, 1934, and departed from Harwich under sail. When the pilot cutter off the sunk came over to me, I was alarmed and wondered, what is she bringing out now to stop me and take me back? But she had come over only to wish us good cheer upon the voyage, and with deep gratitude and a sigh of relief I sailed on. I had 8 cadets and 8 others to carry to America. We were 32 souls all told. There was 100 in the ship's safe, and the gale blew.